Hot.
It's 5:05 and welcome into a Monday edition of the Carolina Journal News Hour on News Talk 1110 99.3 WBT. I'm Nick Craig. Good morning to you. Taking a look at some news from across the nation this morning. Jimmy Carter, the 39th U.S. president and global humanitarian, died yesterday at 100 years old. The longest living American president, Carter passed away peacefully at his home yesterday in Plains, Georgia, surrounded by his family more than a year after entering hospice care. His wife, Rosalind, preceded him in death in November of 2023. She was 96 years old. A peanut farmer turned politician, Carter won the presidential election in 1976 amid the Watergate scandal, championing human rights and brokering the historic Camp David Accords between Egypt and Israel. His presidency, however, faced challenges like major economic turmoil, as well as the Iran hostage crisis, leading to his 1980 landslide defeat by Ronald Reagan. Carter's post-presidency redefined his public service through the Carter Center. He mediated conflicts, monitored elections, and advanced major global health initiatives through his foundation. Awarded the 2002 Nobel Peace Prize, he remained a voice for peace and justice. Living in Plains, Georgia, Carter embodied humility and faith, leaving a lasting legacy of integrity, service, and hope. We did get some comments from some elected officials across the state of North Carolina, as well as President Trump. We'll get into those comments coming up a little bit later on this morning right here on the Carolina Journal News Hour, where it's now 5:07, and we are keeping an eye this morning on election protests. Yes, here in the state, as we get ready to turn the calendar over to 2025, there is still a lot that is ongoing for this race for North Carolina Supreme Court. It's between Republican judge in Jefferson Griffin and current incumbent Democrat Justice Allison Riggs. And we've got an update this morning and some additional timelines for that. A federal judge is ordering the North Carolina State Board of Elections to explain why he should keep a case involving a dispute over this recent Supreme Court election. The board must comply with an order by January the 1st. Republican State Supreme Court candidate Jefferson Griffin filed a complaint back on December the 18th asking the North Carolina's highest court, that would be our Supreme Court in the state, to block the certification of the election pitting Griffin against appointed incumbent Democrat Allison Riggs. The election board removed that case to federal court the following day. Griffin filed a motion earlier this week on Monday seeking a preliminary injunction against the election board. He also asked for an expedited schedule to address the injunction. U.S. Chief District Judge Richard Myers issued an order last Thursday granting Riggs' request to intervene in the case. Myers also permitted intervention by 2 activist groups and 3 individuals working with the Democrat operative Mark Elias's law firm. Mark Elias has spent the last couple of years going around the United States with his various lawyers at his law group and battling against Republicans in various election challenges like the one that we're talking about here in North Carolina. Myers did grant Griffin's motion for an expedited briefing in the case. The election board and interveners have to file responses to Griffin's request for an injunction by January the 1st. That's coming up here later on this week. According to Myers, in a motion that was written over late last week, he says, as part of this response, the North Carolina State Board of Elections is ordered to show cause, that's in all caps, why this matter should not be remanded to the North Carolina Supreme Court for lack of subject matter jurisdiction. The judge set a January the 3rd deadline for Griffin to reply to arguments put forward by those election officials, which they will do on the 1st, as well as Riggs and the Elias plaintiffs. Griffin hopes to block the election board from declaring Riggs as the winner of the November the 5th election. Riggs leads Griffin currently by 734 votes across the state. That's out of more than 5.5 million ballots that were cast statewide. A lawsuit from Griffin aims to block the election board from counting more than 60,000 ballots that he has labeled and his lawyers have labeled as unlawful. The board up till now has rejected all of Griffin's protests against those ballots. A final decision on those protests is expected on Friday. According to paperwork Griffin's lawyers filed last Monday in court. Unless Griffin secures an injunction by January the 9th, the election board could vote sometime later on that day or the next to certify the election. Such a vote would moot Griffin's legal challenge. According to Griffin's attorneys, they wrote, "Without a preliminary injunction, mootness will deprive this court of jurisdiction to consider any of the issues present in this matter." His lawyers continued by saying a preliminary injunction, however, will simply stay the board's hand. The board will not be harmed by that injunction, and North Carolina law contemplates delays in election certification while judicial review is pending. By contrast, Judge Griffin will be irreparably harmed absent the injunction. His protests will be mooted and he will lose the election. Preventing the board's certification from mootness, Judge Griffin challenges unlawful ballots, and that will serve the important public interest in election integrity as well as franchisement, among others. Myers, that he is the federal judge in this case, issued a December the 20th order denying Griffin's request for a temporary restraining order in this case. The same judge oversees a lawsuit that the North Carolina Democrat Party filed on December the 6th, dealing with the same sort of ballot challenges that Griffin addresses in his complaint. Griffin intervened as a defendant in that case as well. Griffin's complaint highlighted 3 categories of election protests that he and his legal counsel are going after: voters who registered without providing a driver's license number or the last 4 digits of a social security number, voters who have never lived in the state of North Carolina, and overseas voters who did not provide photo identification. Looking at the court filing, it says, in response to these protests, the state board and opposing candidates Justice Allison Riggs have claimed that Judge Griffin is seeking a retroactive change in election law. That flatly mischaracterizes the timeline. Our registration statuses require driver's license and social security numbers going back to 2004. That is in reference to HAVA, the Help Americans Vote Act that was passed at the federal level in 2004, which requires State Board of Elections, like here in North Carolina, to request and require that information on all voter registration forms. His attorneys go on to say, our state constitution has imposed a residency requirement since 1776, and photo identification has been required for absentee voting since at least 2018. The laws that should have governed this election were therefore established long before this election. The state board simply chose to break the law. Now, obviously, that's a lot that we're going over here this morning. The big takeaway is now that U.S. Chief District Judge Richard Myers issued an order late last week that requires the North Carolina State Board of Elections to show cause why this matter cannot and should not be handled by the state's highest court and should be pushed to federal court where he currently serves. We expect a pretty expedited timeline on all of this. The State Board of Elections, as well as some of the other defendants in this case, have until Wednesday, January the 1st, to get their various court briefings back to the U.S. District Judge. After that, it will be Judge Griffin that has up until Friday, that's January the 3rd, to respond to any of those claims. That is one of the major stories that we are tracking this morning over on our website, carolinajournal.com, where it's now 5:14, News Talk 1110, 99.3 WBT. Time to get a look at traffic on this Monday morning with Boomer Von Cannon.
Hey, thank you, Nick. We're looking great.
It's 5:19. Welcome back to the Carolina Journal News Hour. News Talk 1110, 99.3 WBT. You can check out our show live on YouTube at our Carolina Journal YouTube channel each and every weekday morning, or take the show with you on your own time by downloading the Carolina Journal News Hour podcast. It's available wherever you get your shows. Just search for the Carolina Journal News Hour. Tap that follow or subscribe button and take the show with you on demand on your own time. It's the Carolina Journal News Hour podcast. Download and subscribe now. Looking at some news across Charlotte this morning, a man was killed after a tree fell on his pickup truck while he was driving in Mooresville Sunday morning. This is during the time in which heavy storms and rain were across that region, according to the North Carolina State Highway Patrol. It happened around 10 o'clock on North Carolina Highway 152 near Brumley Road. The driver, 70-year-old Matthew Teppel of Cleveland, died at the scene. The initial investigations showed that speed and impairment were not contributing factors in the crash, and it was likely due to that severe weather in the area at the time. Highway 152 was closed for about 4 hours while investigators were on the scene there. There were various tornado watches and severe thunderstorm warnings in effect in around the area at that time. But unfortunately, that storm killing one, at least appears as of this morning, killing one according to the North Carolina State Highway Patrol. We'll keep an eye on that story right here on the Carolina Journal News Hour. With the passing of Jimmy Carter yesterday, the 39th President of the United States at the age of 100 years old, we did get some comments coming in from elected officials across the state of North Carolina. Governor Roy Cooper posting on X yesterday evening, quote, "Today we lost an icon who is the epitome of what it means to be a true public servant in and out of office. In a political world of hate and bombast, President Carter was a kind, calm, and giving man of faith. Well done, good and faithful servant." That was a comment there from Governor Roy Cooper. We also heard some comments from incoming governor and current Democratic Attorney General Josh Stein. He said in a post on X around 5 o'clock yesterday evening, "President Jimmy Carter was a principled man, a committed humanitarian, and a true public servant. He represented the best of America, guided by faith and service as well as dedication to our nation's promise. I send my heartfelt condolences to his family. May his memory be a blessing." That's the comment coming in from Democrat Attorney General and Governor-elect Josh Stein. We did also get some comments coming in on Jimmy Carter's passing from President-elect Donald Trump. He put out a post, a pretty lengthy one on Truth Social yesterday. It reads, in part, "I just heard of the news about the passing of President Jimmy Carter. Those of us who have been fortunate to have served as president understand that this is a very exclusive club, and we can only relate to the enormous responsibility of leading the greatest nation in history. The challenges that Jimmy faced as president came at a pivotal time in our country, and he did everything in his power to improve the lives for all Americans. For that, we all owe him a debt of gratitude. Melania and I are thinking warmly of the Carter family and their loved ones during this difficult time. We urge everyone to keep them in their hearts and prayers." Those comments coming in yesterday from President-elect Donald Trump, as many others commenting on the passing of Jimmy Carter. A couple of comments here in North Carolina as well. We'll continue to bring you some of those comments coming up here on the program a little bit later on this morning, where it's now 5:23. News Talk 1110, 99.3 WBT. North Carolina ranks number 9th in the nation for the highest gas tax. Listen to this. Currently in North Carolina, gas is taxed at 40.65 cents per gallon. California ranked number 1 in the nation at 68.10 cents per gallon, and Alaska was the lowest at 8.95 cents per gallon. The gas tax acts as a user fee that goes to fund the construction and maintenance of highways and roads. User fees are a way to attribute the cost of government services to the people who use them, avoiding charging people taxes for things they don't want or do not use, according to the report. In this state, the tax revenue goes to the highway and highway trust funds that are both managed under the North Carolina Department of Transportation for road maintenance and construction. One caveat to the gas tax, however, has emerged with more electric vehicles on the road. This diminishes the gas tax as a practical implementation of a user fee for road use. To close this loophole, many states have been considering implementing a vehicle mileage travel tax, or a VMT, or a mileage-based user fee. Revenue from gas taxes would further decline if Governor Roy Cooper's goal of increasing zero-emission vehicles to 1.25 million in the state by 2030 is met. Cooper issued this goal in 2022 with Executive Order 246, and with that, he says that zero-emission vehicles include fully electric vehicles as well as plug-in hybrids. Experts have done various analysis of these numbers and determined the likelihood of meeting this goal in a recent report from the John Locke Foundation. It's called Lighting the Path. If that goal is to be met, zero-emission vehicles will account for 14% of North Carolina's vehicular fleet by 2030, according to the report over at the John Locke Foundation. The report says such an outcome is unlikely. However, even before considering the costs, it would require the number of new EVs to double every 2 years. But zero-emission registrations have been recently slowing, not increasing. Experts assert that should the 2030 goal be met, it would detrimentally impact the funding for North Carolina's infrastructure. According to Joseph Harris, who is a fiscal policy analyst over at the John Locke Foundation, told the Carolina Journal, if Cooper's goal of 1.25 million zero-emission vehicles is met, it will create an annual funding gap for roads and highways that could be north of tens of millions of dollars. So a significant amount of money that we're talking about there. Additionally, the value of the tax revenue decreases over the time, as most states have not adjusted their tax rates to match inflation. Harris continued by telling Carolina Journal, North Carolina is one of only 5 states in which state government owns more than half of all road miles. Consequently, the construction and maintenance of our roads heavily depends on state reserves. In the fiscal year 2023, the North Carolina motor fuel tax accounted for 36% of all transportation infrastructure funding. However, this revenue source is expected to become insufficient due to increasing fuel efficiencies as well as more electric vehicles being on the roads. The annual registration fees for electric vehicles of $214 generates about $50 less in revenue for the state than typical drivers of gasoline-powered vehicles. Joseph Harris with the Locke Foundation says, to ensure the state has adequate transportation revenues, policymakers should consider replacing the motor fuel tax and EV fee with a vehicle mileage travel tax. A VMT charges drivers per mile traveled regardless of fuel type. By implementing a uniform rate for all light-duty vehicles, a VMT would enhance fairness in tax code and address the revenue shortfalls. This is likely going to be a long-term discussion that takes place not only in the state of North Carolina, but likely across the nation as we continue to see the increase of full-on electric vehicles, plug-in hybrids, and other sorts of automobiles that do not use traditional gas or diesel and do not pay into that gas tax, which does fund so many of our road and construction projects that we see across the states here, like North Carolina. It's something we'll keep a close eye on. You can read more details on this story this morning and the report from the John Locke Foundation by visiting our website, carolinajournal.com, where it's now 5:29. News Talk 1110, 99.3 WBT. Well, speaking of the roadways, let's get another look at traffic this Monday morning with Boomer Von Cannon.
Hey, thanks a lot, Nick. And
It's 5:35. You're listening to the Carolina Journal News Hour on News Talk 1110, 99.3 WBT. I'm Nick Craig. Good Monday morning to you. We are continuing diving into various pieces this morning over at carolinajournal.com as part of our Waste Watch series, which is looking at waste at both the federal and statewide level and why it's important for you. We turn our attention this morning to the 2021 Infrastructure and Investment Job Acts. That was the federal government where they appropriated more than $7 billion to build a nationwide network of electric vehicle charging stations. According to a recent joint report of the Office of Energy and Transportation, they spent $7 billion and only 17 charging stations have been built so far, just 17. The bill also allocates billions of dollars worth of taxpayer monies to expand rural broadband. These are just some of the programs in the bills that critics say made broad promises but have yet to deliver. In a recent letter addressed to Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy, both of them co-chairs of the Department of Government Efficiency, or DOGE as it's known, Senator Joni Ernst argued that significant federal waste could be reduced by eliminating programs like charging stations for EVs and expanding broadband access funding with funds appropriated in House Resolution 3684. The letter reads, 3 years later, just 17 EV stations are completed, and not a single person, not one, has been connected to the internet yet. It's time to pull the plug. Turning to the EV charging stations first, the bill invested $7.5 billion to build a nationwide fleet of 500,000 EV chargers, which promise to reduce emissions, improve air quality, and create jobs. All part of the green agenda prompted by the Biden administration nationally and the Cooper administration here in North Carolina. In 2022, Governor Roy Cooper issued Executive Order 246, which we talked about a little bit earlier this morning, which establishes a goal of increasing the state's zero-emission vehicles to 1.25 million by 2030. Zero-emission vehicles include both the full-on EVs and plug-in hybrids. Now taking a look at broadband infrastructure, House Resolution 3684 also appropriated $42.5 billion for states to expand their broadband infrastructure to more than 30 million Americans living in rural communities without access to high-speed, reliable internet. The Wall Street Journal editorial board wrote in an October column, 3 years later, ground hasn't been broken on a single project. Again, that coming from the Wall Street Journal. They said the administration recently said that construction won't start until next year at the earliest, meaning many projects won't be up and running until the end of this decade. So that goes to show you at least some of the waste in these programs. Again, this is all part of our Waste Watch series over at carolinajournal.com, where we shine a spotlight on wasteful governmental spending at both the state and federal levels, exposing projects that squander taxpayer dollars. You can read more on that story and our other series by visiting our website, carolinajournal.com, where it's now 538, News Talk 1110 and 99.3 WBT. Diversity, equity, and inclusion. It is a big business in both the federal sector, the private sector. What if I told you that $1 billion was spent on DEI initiatives through the Department of Education at the federal level? Well, that would be 100% accurate. To get some more details on that this morning, it's my pleasure to welcome Katie Zender back to the Carolina Journal News Hour this morning. Katie, unless you've got a typo in your headline, you're reporting $1 billion worth of DEI spending. Is this a spell check error or is this accurate?
Nope, that's correct, Nick. Unfortunately, the U.S. Department of Education has spent over $1 billion in taxpayer dollars funding diversity, equity, and inclusion programs across 42 states and Washington, D.C.
Let's dive a little bit into this, and it's also got a North Carolina connection because one of the individuals sounding the alarm on this is Congresswoman Virginia Foxx. Tell us a little bit about some activities that have gone on over the last couple of weeks involving her.
Right, exactly, Nick. So there's a couple North Carolina ties here. The first one being Virginia Fox. She blasted the Department of Education in a quote where she said, DEI is the woke addiction that the Biden Harris administration simply cannot quit. And then she goes on to talk about the report. If you want to read more of her quote, readers can look at that in the report. But the other North Carolina tie here is that 21.5 million of that 1 billion actually went into funding DEI programs right here in Montgomery County in North Carolina.
And Montgomery County is a little bit east of the Charlotte area. It's right along Interstate 75. Go over those figures again. How many millions of dollars was spent in just that one county alone, Katie?
Right, so 21.5 million in taxpayer dollars. This is actually all out from a new report that was out last week from Parents Defending Education, where they break down the 1 billion in taxpayer dollars. They break it down into three different categories. And so there's three categories: DEI hiring, which is over 400 million, DEI programming, which is over 300 million, and then DEI based mental health/social emotional learning, also known as SEL, which is over 150 million. So those are the three categories of funding that this $1 billion is broken into. But yes, so $21.5 million is right here in Montgomery County in North Carolina, funding DEI programs known as Teacher and Principal Effectiveness Acceleration in Montgomery. That's the acronym TEAM. The program also includes a Teacher Affinity Group, or a TAG group. So what these things are is, according to the program, and I've linked the program for Montgomery County Schools in the article if readers want to look at that more, but it says, as part of our diversity and inclusion plan, we established district-wide TAG groups, or teacher affinity groups, for Black and Hispanic teachers who meet monthly to discuss mutual concerns and provide support for one another. In addition to that, Montgomery School's professional development plan includes monthly training from a university professor called, quote, Teaching in Colors. So over $21 million is going to fund these DEI programs here in Montgomery County in North Carolina.
You know, it's an interesting couple of things that you bring up there. First, getting people together and getting groups together and going over things like accountability and things like that. Katie, inherently, there's no issue there. I think the big question is, how is getting teachers together, in this case, is the first part. The second, having somebody do a monthly training, how does that equate to $21 million over a 12-month calendar year? That seems like you would have to be almost burning the money as it's coming in to spend that kind of money to even get these groups together. It seems incredibly high.
Exactly, Nick. This is an exorbitant amount of money for just these two programs here. So, yes, quite a bit of taxpayer dollars is being poured into that.
Is there any, I guess the question would be, and they're obviously in the district side, they're trying to figure out some sort of accountability. That's in the name of one of their programs. Do we have any accountability on this money? Was it effective? Did this $21.5 million lead to better test scores, better, lower dropout rates, higher graduation rates, anything like that? Or is unfortunately a lot of this just unaccounted for?
Right. So I actually talked to Brian Balfour at John Locke. He's the vice president of research here. And he said, given the fact that half of North Carolina students can't read or perform math at grade level, this news should cause outrage. It's absurd that tax dollars would go to funding these politically charged programs when public schools are failing at their most basic responsibility. This report provides yet more evidence that government schooling has been converted into political training exercises rather than an educational one.
And with that, of course, we're talking about the Department of Education, and we are now learning over the last couple of weeks that the former head of the Small Business Administration in Linda McMahon is going to be making her way into leading the Department of Education. That group is probably going to be under an incredible amount of scrutiny over the next couple of years. Trump's spoken pretty publicly about even dismantling the Department of Education at the federal level and bringing all that money back to the states.
Right, Nick. So back in 2023, under Agenda 27, President-elect Trump promised to close the Department of Education and return all education-related work to the state level. He said, quote, "We spend more money per pupil by 3 times than any other nation, and yet we're worse, and we're absolutely at the bottom," said Trump. "We're one of the worst, so you can't do worse. We're going to end education out of Washington, D.C. We're going to close it up and all those buildings all over the place. And yet people that in many cases hate our children, we're going to send it all back to the states. So that's his plan, is to send it back to the state level. We'll see if he follows through on that. Additionally, Nick, something that I've included in the article is there's a screenshot of all the entities that are receiving funding in North Carolina under for DEI programming. So this includes Duke University, UNC Chapel Hill, several branches of UNC, several prominent universities here in North Carolina, as well as the Department of Public Instruction and several other, nonprofits and entities here in North Carolina. So that's included in the report as well, if readers want to take a look at that.
And they absolutely can take a look at that. Great insight this morning from Katie Zender. You can read more on her story by visiting our website, carolinajournal.com. Where it's now 5:45, News Talk 1110, 99.3 WBT. It's time to get another look at traffic on this Monday morning with Boomer Von Cannon.
Hey, thank you, Nick.
Situation Station.
It's 5:51. Good morning again. Welcome back to the Carolina Journal News Hour. News Talk 1110, 99.3 WBT. I'm Nick Craig. Good Monday morning to you. North Carolina ranks 9th nationally for the highest gas tax at 40.65 cents per gallon, with revenues funding road maintenance and construction through the North Carolina Department of Transportation. However, the rise of electric vehicles is creating a challenge that the gas tax model has, as EVs contribute less to infrastructure funding despite still using the same roadways as gas-powered vehicles. Governor Roy Cooper has a goal of 1.25 million zero-emission vehicle, or ZEVs, by 2030, and that could exacerbate the issue, potentially creating a funding gap of tens of millions of dollars annually for the state roads and highway program. Experts, including the John Locke Foundation, question the feasibility of achieving Cooper's zero-emission vehicle goal due to slowing registrations and higher costs. Additionally, North Carolina's motor fuel tax revenues, which makes up about 36% of transportation funding, is expected to decline further with increased fuel efficiency and EV adoption. To address this challenge, an analysis proposed transitioning the vehicle mileage tax, or transitioning to a vehicle mileage tax, a VMT, which charges drivers based on miles driven, ensuring fair contributions from all vehicles regardless of fuel type. This approach could help stabilize infrastructure funding and improve the tax system and keep it funded. You can read more on that story this morning. It's one of our top stories over at carolinajournal.com. And turning our attention to our top story this morning, a federal judge is ordering the North Carolina State Board of Elections to explain why he should keep a case involving a dispute over the recent state Supreme Court election. And the North Carolina Board of Elections has a tight timeline. They've got to comply with that order by January the 1st. Republican state Supreme Court candidate Jefferson Griffin filed a complaint back on December the 18th asking the North Carolina's High Court, our state Supreme Court, to block the certification of the election, which has Griffin running against appointed incumbent Democrat Allison Riggs. The election board removed the case to federal court the following day. Griffin filed a motion 1 week ago seeking a preliminary injunction against the election board. He also asked for an expedited schedule to address the injunction. U.S. Chief District Judge Richard Myers issued an order last Thursday granting Riggs' request to intervene in the case. Myers also permitted intervention by 2 activist groups and 3 individuals who are all working with Democrat operative Mark Elias's law firm. Myers granted Griffin's motion for an expedited briefing in the case, and the election board and interveners are required and shall file responses to Griffin's request for an injunction by Wednesday, January the 1st. As part of this, Myers said in his ruling, the North Carolina State Board of Elections is ordered to show cause why this matter should not be remanded to the North Carolina Supreme Court for lack of subject matter jurisdiction. The judge also set a January the 3rd deadline for Griffin to reply to arguments put forward by election officials, as well as Riggs and the Elias plaintiffs. Griffin hopes to block the election board from declaring Riggs as the winner of the November the 5th election. Riggs currently leads Griffin by about 734 votes. That's out of over 5.5 million ballots that were cast statewide in that contest. A lawsuit from Griffin aims to block the election board from counting more than 60,000 ballots that he and his team have targeted as unlawful. The board has rejected Griffin's protests against those ballots as of right now. A final decision on those protests is expected by Friday, according to paperwork that Griffin's lawyers filed, and unless Griffin secures an injunction by January the 9th, the election board could vote the following day to certify the election. Such a vote would moot Griffin's legal challenge. According to his attorneys, they say without a preliminary injunction, mootness will deprive the court of jurisdiction to consider any of these issues presented in the matter. A preliminary injunction, however, will simply stay the board's hand. The State Board of Elections will not be harmed by that injunction, and North Carolina law contemplates delays in election certification while judicial review is pending. They say, by contrast, however, Judge Griffin will be irreparably harmed absent the injunction. His protests will be mooted and he will lose the election. And preventing the board's certification from mootness, Judge Griffin challenges to unlawful ballots will serve the important public interest in election integrity as well as franchisement, among others. Myers issued an order back on December the 20th, which denied Griffin's request for a temporary restraining order. The same judge is currently overseeing a lawsuit with the North Carolina Democrat Party that was filed on December the 6th, dealing with some of the same ballot challenges that Griffin addresses in his complaint. So a very tight timeline on that. We should learn some additional details as we get into the middle and latter parts of the week. We'll be keeping an eye on it right here. That's going to do it for a Monday edition of the Carolina Journal News Hour. WBT News is next, followed by Good Morning BT. We're back tomorrow morning, 5 to 6, right here on News Talk 1110 and 99.3 WBT.
WBT
Crushed it, dude.
FM Chester.